Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the Battle of Aldie custom multiplayer game. In part 3, we went over the retreat from Middleburg. We also saw a growing Union force at Aldie, and we covered the action along the Braddock Road. We are now at the 9 a.m. staff meetings, and this is the first open discussions the sides have had since 7 a.m., and it is the last one they will have until 11 a.m. Starting with the 9 a.m. Union discussion, there was really an exorbitant amount of time spent discussing the possibility the rebels were trying to encircle and isolate the whole Union army. And this was a very unrealistic discussion for them to be having at this point. I almost felt like they went down this rabbit hole of pessimism and they just couldn't drag themselves out. And it really dictated the entire discussion for the Federal side during the 9 a.m. turn. Luckily, Pope remained calm and just kind of dismissed the idea, but it lingered overhead throughout the discussion like a guillotine. McDowell then continued with his previously stated belief that the main rebel army was moving to the west somewhere. Because he was worried about being isolated, McDowell urged that his corps and Sigel be withdrawn back to Gilbert's Corner and attempt to hold a line from Aldie all the way to the eastern edge of the battlefield. Banks also believed that a second rebel corps was heading for Aldie, and that all Union efforts should now be wholly defensive. The 9 a.m. Union orders would be that Banks was to pull all the way back into Aldie and form a final defensive line to protect the main Union depot. McDowell would continue to fall back towards Gilbert's Corner and look to build a new defensive line. Sigel would also begin to fall back from McDowell's left flank and back towards the town of Gilbert's Corner. I'm actually going to stop and do my unasked for 2 cents even before I get into the rebel side, because there's a lot to talk about, especially the isolation talk. And this was just extremely bizarre, how this came into their conversation so quickly. And I think it's almost a tribute to the rebel players they're going against. The 3 Confederates they're playing have established and well-earned reputations of doing everything they can to isolate and destroy an enemy force when they play them in a battle. And I think that's come into play here, and it's a situation where their reputations have almost been worth an entire corps, because the Federals are looking over their shoulders left and right, trying to figure out when the axe is going to fall on them. And I have to believe at this point, the Pope is starting to feel maybe like General Grant did in 1864, when his generals were being overly pessimistic about the capabilities of Robert E. Lee.
Bobby Lee is surprised as fool us, chopped on us for 2 bloody years. And I know that man's ways. He'll throw his entire force between us and the Rapid and cut us off completely. He could bag the whole damn Northern Army.
Gentlemen, you know I can't avoid cuss words, but this time I'm going to use one because I am damn tired of hearing what General Lee's going to do to us. Start thinking about what we're going to do to him.
All right, back to my 2 cents. There's still a lot of continued confusion on the Federal side. They still believe there are 2 Confederate corps to the west of the mountains and just 1 to the east of the mountains. I think that's going to change over the next few hours as they engage with Field's division and maybe Kemper's division of A.P. Hill's corps, and they'll get a better idea of what they're up against. But for now, they continue to look for more rebels. They're looking all over the map, trying to find almost a mythical Confederate corps that's going to pop up and isolate or destroy their flank. The Federals are now fully committed to the defense. They have no more initiative in this battle, and they are falling back on all fronts. And that is probably a good idea, all things considered. They are pretty confused about what the situation is outside of their lines, and when you're confused like that, it's best to just fall back, regroup, let things develop, and get some answers before you commit to any major plan. Moving over to the 9 a.m. rebel discussion, the rebel commanders continue to mostly focus on keeping their forces organized along the narrow corridor of the Braddock Road. Longstreet stated that, "I do not think that we will be outnumbered in the east. We will soon have 2 full corps and a cavalry brigade. They have 1 corps, 1 division, and the remnants of 1 cavalry brigade. At best, they can achieve a rough parity if Sigel brings up another division, but I doubt he will in view of the threat in the west. If another division does arrive in the east, then I know that the west and north is weak, so I will push hard upon them there." A.P. Hill supported this idea and requested that Jackson attack along the Braddock Road to keep up the pressure on McDowell as he fell back. The 9 a.m. rebel orders: Longstreet was to continue his current advances. He was to investigate north of Aldie, and maybe north of Gilbert's Corner if there was a chance to do so, as a golden opportunity might arise to the rear of Gilbert's Corner. Longstreet's infantry should only have to face Banks's corps west of Aldie, and he might launch any attacks on the Federals which seem advantageous to make. Meanwhile, Jackson and A.P. Hill over in the east were to move along the Braddock Road with Jackson on the left and A.P. Hill on the right. They were to concentrate on maximizing the Federal casualties while minimizing theirs by taking advantage of the terrain and their current superiority in artillery. No mass attack was ordered, but if an opportunity presented itself to inflict serious damage upon the enemy or to turn a flank, they were granted the permission to make an attack at once. The 9 a.m. turn now. Both sides have moved for the first time after their meetings, and the Federal cavalry is escaping. They were boxed in by the Confederate advance, but did manage to escape through a narrow corridor just to the south. Meanwhile, in the south, Jones's division remains in place. There are 5,500 Confederates guarding White Plains and Georgetown, and the Confederates really have had no discussions about using these troops in any offensive capacity just yet. In the east, the Federals continue to retreat slowly back towards Gilbert's Corner. And Scammon's brigade, which was headed south to get on McDowell's right flank, has actually turned back towards Aldie and is now moving northward once more. Longstreet's corps with Anderson and Hood are pursuing the Federals towards Aldie. Anderson has taken the northeast road, while Hood is moving directly east. And we're going to do a quick casualty update because we've hit a milestone in this game. The Federals are now at 25% of their loss limit, while the Confederates are at 10% of the way to their loss limit. Looking at the Federal order of battle, and you can feel free to hit pause if you like, the Federals have taken just 373 losses combined between the 1st and 2nd Corps. What's really hurt them is the cavalry losses. They've lost 2,198 men of Buford's cavalry division, and that is what is accounting for the majority of their point loss. On the Confederate side, there's been just 129 combined losses between Longstreet's and Hill's corps. That seems crazy, especially because Longstreet has gained so many miles of ground. He's captured Middleburg, and now he's pressing up against Aldie, and he's only done it losing 81 men. Jackson has lost the most on the Confederate side, but he has gained over a mile of ground along the Braddock Road and has been doing most of the fighting against McDowell's corps. 9:20 a.m., and the Federals have had another close call trying to escape with their cavalry back towards Aldie, but I do believe they're going to be able to sneak out of it. In the east, the Confederates are applying pressure all along McDowell's line, but still the Federals are managing to hold and fall back towards Gilbert's Corner. 9:40 a.m., and Anderson has swung around Aldie. I thought he might move to the southeast along the turnpike there, but instead he has continued to follow the road to the northeast and is moving around Aldie's flank. And as I kind of predicted, most of the Federal cavalry has managed to escape Hood's trap, and they are moving southeast to get back into Aldie through the back door. It is 10 a.m. in the game now, and is Anderson moving northeast? His entire infantry division is now on that road heading to the northeast, circling around behind Aldie and actually behind the entire Federal army. If he continues on this route, there's every reason to believe he can get in behind McDowell and Sigel and attack Gilbert's Corner from the north. And he can do that because Banks is in full defensive mode at this point. Banks has completely encircled himself around Aldie and the main Union depot there, and is unable to stop or really even scout what the Confederates are doing outside of Aldie. Let's go ahead and pull up the map around Aldie. You can see that Anderson's division is heading northeast, while Hood is advancing on Aldie directly from the west. Banks's corps is completely encircled around Aldie, and they have their backs to the Little River, which is separating them from the other two Federal corps of McDowell and Sigel. And Aldie is the main Union supply base, and that is the objective the Federals in this game cannot lose, because if they do, it triggers an immediate Confederate victory. Back to the overhead map now. You can see that Hood stands alone. If Anderson does move to the northeast, the only Confederate forces facing Banks's entire corps would be Hood's division of about 6,000 men. And that is because, still to the south, Jones remains inactive. 10:20 a.m., and Anderson has turned to the southeast. And I'm actually kind of surprised by this. I thought he was going to continue to the northeast, but instead, he's looking, it seems, to get north of Aldie and attack from that direction. In the east, Jackson and Hill continue their advance. Nothing has changed along the Braddock Road as the Federals continue to fall back and the Confederates continue to pursue them. 10:40 a.m. now, and Fitz Lee is threatening the rear of the Federal positions. And this is going to be an interesting development to watch over the next hour to see what Fitz Lee does and whether or not he tries to get over the rivers and in behind Gilbert's Corner and Aldie. Along the Braddock Road, the stalemate continues, the Federals fall back a little bit, and the Confederates pursue. We're going to look at the overhead map of that area actually, just to the south of Gilbert's Corner. You can see McDowell and Sigel have almost merged their two Federal corps, while Jackson and Hill have done the same thing, chasing them from the south. And they've just continued to move north for the last 3-4 hours of game time, a few hexes at a time. But I am curious where the Federal line is going to end up. Is it going to end up moving towards Gilbert's Corner and the Federals facing to the southeast? Or will they attempt to make a line more east to west and fall back upon that line? I'm not too sure yet, but it will be interesting to watch. And there's been really very little fighting along this line, despite the fact that the two forces are so close together. But the Federals fall back each turn, and the Confederates follow each turn. So, at the end of this episode, my unasked for 2 cents about everything that's going on, well, there's just no initiative from the Federals right now. And they are being pushed around this map really at will by the Confederate forces. Because once you lose any possibility of offensive action, it just becomes way too easy for your opponent to dictate what's going on. And that's what's happened here, unfortunately, for the Federals. They have no initiative, and the Confederates are just bullying them across the map. The Federals are struggling to find a line to defend in the east. They've been falling back for so long, but they've yet to establish really where their line is heading. They're just heading backwards. And they're still concerned with being flanked and isolated by the rebel army. And they need to figure out a plan sooner rather than later because they're running out of space to fall back to. So they just need to pick a defensive line. For the Confederates, hell, just roll on. They have plowed across this map a lot faster than I anticipated, and I think a lot faster than the Federals ever imagined that they could. So for the Confederates, keep moving, keep pressing, and keep making the Federals worry. All is well. What am I looking forward to in the next part? Is Longstreet going to attack Aldie? Is he going to take Hood's division and Anderson and attack from both sides of Aldie? Or is he just trying to hem them in that area? Can McDowell and Sigel build a defensive line? They need to do this. If they don't, the Confederates are just going to continue to push them all the way back to Gilbert's Corner. And if they are pushed back to Gilbert's Corner, will the Confederates launch an attack to capture that town? I truthfully don't know because there's a lot of Federals in just a small area. Will the Confederates attack them frontally, or will they continue to work around their flank and try to get around them? I appreciate everyone who's watched this video. Be sure to give it a like on here if you've enjoyed it, or leave a comment. The next episode will be coming up soon as we continue to view the Battle of Aldie.